welcome dear kids to Unlock series. Today we shall have a class on literary criticism where we shall try to understand John Dryden as a critic. You know that Dryden lived during the Neoclassical age and you have already studied about his contribution to literature during semester 2 History of English Literature classes. It is his contribution to criticism that we shall try to understand in this class. Dr. Johnson, in his famous work, The Lives of the English Poets, says that Dryden may be properly considered as the father of English criticism, as a writer who first taught us to determine upon principles the merit of composition. When the merit of a work is judged on principles, it is normative criticism. So Dryden initiates normative criticism. He takes norms from classicism, but he is not a mere classicist, but an empirical critic. That means he bases his criticism on his practice as a writer. So he is not just going by logic, but he bases his critical theories on his practice. He was a poet as well as a dramatist. So he was a writer who practiced writing, and therefore his criticism is actually based on his writings as a poet and a dramatist. Again, George Watson, the famous critic, in his essay on Dryden, remarks that the first Englishman to attempt descriptive criticism was John Dryden. Descriptive criticism is the analysis of literary works, their aims, methods, and effects. So, descriptive criticism analyzes a literary work based on their aims, methods, and effects. As Watson says, descriptive criticism begins in self-justification. Here the writers discuss their own works and then they try to defend them through their preface. So, you find that much of Dryden's criticism is also available through the prefaces that he has written to his plays. Thus, Dryden balances himself between theory and practice. Dryden wrote only one work of formal criticism, and that is the essay of dramatic poesy in a crowded literary career of over 40 years. All the remaining works where his criticism predominates are prefaces, and most of them to his own plays and poems. Works of other poets occupy a very moderate proportion of his critical interest. And that's why we can say that he earned for himself the title of the first unprejudiced critic in literature, or the first judicial critic. Let's see more about his only formal work of criticism, an essay on dramatic poesy. It is the unofficial manifesto of his critical creed. It means everything related to his critical theories can be found in this work. It is a landmark in the history of literary criticism, and T.S. Eliot compared this to Plato's dialogues. The work is in the form of a dialogue or a literary debate among four characters. They are Critic, Eugenius, Lycidius, and Neander. The characters are real men, though Dryden disguises them under classical names. Critic represents Sir Robert Howard, Dryden's brother-in-law. Eugenius stands for Charles Sackville, Dryden's friend, and Dryden dedicated this essay to him. Lycidius presents Sir Charles Sedley, the dramatist and poet friend of Dryden, and Neander is Dryden himself. Neander means new man. The essay has a light conversational opening and humorous ending and discusses the following important issues. The topics discussed in an essay on dramatic poesy include the relative merits of classical poets and poets of Dryden's age, whether existing French plays are superior to contemporary English plays, whether Elizabethan dramatists are superior to Restoration dramatists, if classical canons are rigidly observed, can dramas achieve perfection? And finally, the comparative merits and demerits of blank verse and rhyme in dramas. The argument is related to major issues in drama. And by introducing the dialogue form, Dryden presents the pros and cons of all these problems. Dryden presents different viewpoints with absolute integrity without attacking or being partial to one side. The views are presented in a very balanced manner, and Dryden uses Ben Jonson's play Silent Woman to build up a case for the English tradition. Dryden's fundamental approach to literature is contained in his definition of a play in an essay of dramatic poesy. So we need to understand how he defines a play, and this tells us about Dryden's fundamental approach to literature. A play, he says, is a just and lively image of human nature, its passions and humours, and the changes of fortune to which it is subject for the delight and instruction of mankind. The essence of poetry is also the same according to Dryden. It should reflect human nature, its humours and passions. It is the same as what Pope has said, the proper study of mankind is man. So every genre of literature reflects the passions, the emotions, and everything that is related to mankind, and this is what makes literature appealing to people of all ages. Dryden uses the word just very carefully to show that poetry must be an exact image of life. So a play is a just and lively image of human nature. It's a true and exact image. So just means exact image. As Johnson says, where there is leisure for fiction, there is little grief. So when you bring in more and more elements of imagination or fictional elements, the sincerity will not be felt in literature. That is what Johnson says, and that was also the view of Dryden. Which means that Dryden was actually not for fancy of fiction. Verisimilitude is the essence of poetry. So verisimilitude is the essence of poetry. Lively is the word that goes back to Horace's delight. And any representation in poetry must be capable of attracting the reader's attention to the beauty of truth, because only what is truth and what is sincere should be portrayed in literature, and that is what attracts people's attention to literature. Dryden follows the tradition that essential function of poetry is to teach mankind. He implies that a just and lively representation will always be instructive to the readers, and that is why he says that a play is a just and lively image of human nature, its passions and humours, and the changes of fortune to which it is subject for the delight and instruction of mankind. So look at the two words which are very important there. The word just, which means exact. A play or literature should be a just and lively image of human nature. And lively means it's a reference to Horace's delight. So truth and instruction should be there in literature according to Dryden. Another significant contribution of Dryden was his defense of rhyme. He skillfully makes critics attack rhyme and then takes upon himself the responsibility of defending rhyme. Rhyme is nothing but the choice of words and placing them in a suitable manner that would make the language natural. When Dryden started writing, he had to battle with blank verse which had been exhausted of all its energy. Writers like Shakespeare and Milton coming before Dryden had drained blank verse of all its energy. And Dryden had before him the heroic couplet with its rhymed points that could serve as an instrument for satirical cut and thrust. But in dramatic dialogue it may appear artificial. And Dryden goes on to defend it as a novel experiment. And he also said that rhyme was a great help to memory, especially actors, and also that rhyme was a restraint on excess of emotionalism. Dryden's opinions on rhyme virtually settled the issue for more than 100 years when the heroic couplet was in vogue. Among Dryden's great contribution was his brilliant paragraph on Shakespeare in his essay on dramatic poesy. It was the first sustained criticism on Shakespeare, and It became a foundation for Dr. Johnson's preface to Shakespeare. At the end of Dr. Johnson's preface to Shakespeare, Dr. Johnson quotes an entire paragraph written by Dryden on Shakespeare as a specimen for encomiastic criticism. Dryden was all praise for Shakespeare, and what Dryden wrote about Shakespeare was quoted by Dr. Johnson at the end of his preface to Shakespeare. On page 55 of your text, English Literary Criticism and Theory, an Introductory History by M.S. Nagarajan, you can find this quotation, that is what Dryden says about Shakespeare. Dryden says that Shakespeare was a comprehensive poet of nature, that he had a comprehensive mind, and that all the images of nature were actually incidents to Shakespeare. And Dryden also says that though Shakespeare was unequaled, he had faults. And what are the faults that Dryden finds in Shakespeare? Dryden tells his comic wit degenerates to cliches, and his tragic, that is his serious swelling, the descriptions of what is tragic by Shakespeare, according to Dryden, degenerates into bombast. So this is how Dryden estimates Shakespeare, and Dr. Johnson quotes the entire paragraph given by Dryden on Shakespeare as an example of encomiastic criticism.